As protests continue, Californians wonder what will happen to immigrants and the environment under President Donald Trump. The class action lawsuit against Trump University is back in the news. And the bypass bridge around Balboa Park has been approved by the City Council once again. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Matthew Hall, Editorial and Opinion Director at the San Diego Union-Tribune. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Mark.
Good to have you back again. Jean Guerrero, Fronteras reporter for KPBS News. Hi, Jean.
Hi, great to be here.
Reporter Bianca Bruno of Courthouse News. Hi, Bianca.
Hi, how are you?
Glad you're here today. And Roger Scholey, who covers growth and development for the Union-Tribune. Hi, Roger.
Hey, Mark.
Glad to see you back again. Well, Donald Trump campaigned for 16 months and won an electoral college victory on promises to build a wall, deport millions, drain the swamp, dump Obamacare, renege on the Iran nuclear deal, ditch the Paris Climate Agreement. But the president-elect has been confoundingly vague when it comes to exactly how he's going to do all that stuff. So the question of what to expect from Trump, especially here in California, is vexing indeed. Matt, your recent editorial in the UT took some stab at what might happen here. How do you see it as we sit here in the middle of this transition?
We do not know, is the short answer. Look, the three most important words you got to remember from Trump's campaign are everything is negotiable. And largely that's because he staked out some positions, and then he staked out a different position on the same position, and then 3 or 5 times in some positions came back.
Well, the wall, he was pretty definite on it, all those rallies.
That said, and I'm not being facetious, there are some issues that people need to be on the lookout for. One is the wall, one is illegal immigration, and the other is Obamacare. He actually, in his 60 Minutes interview on Sunday, said that the 3 top priorities for his first days in office are going to be Obamacare, tax reform, and illegal immigration. So taking those in order, he says he wants to replace and repeal Obamacare. Not so fast. That's not so easy to do, and largely because he says that he wants to keep 2 of the big provisions of Obamacare, which are the ability of kids to stay on their parents' insurance till they're 26, and the ability of everyone with a pre-existing condition to get medical care.
But if I recall, the negotiation back in 2009, 2010 was that trade-off was that they got the guaranteed folks are going to buy insurance or get a penalty for not doing that. That was the trade-off, and he doesn't talk about that.
Yeah, this is a complicated negotiation that he has in front of him. Whether he can do it or not remains to be seen. He says he wants to. He has both chambers of Congress under GOP control. So if it's going to happen, I think you're going to see it start to happen fairly soon. All
right. Now, Gene, I want to turn to you. You've been reporting on President Obama's DACA initiative, and remind us what that is and who's taking advantage of it, who's involved in that.
Right, so DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's essentially a sort of temporary deportation relief or deferred deportation for people who arrived in the United States before they were 16 years old. A lot of them brought here as children by their parents. And what it allows them to do is get a work permit. So a lot of them are able to get formal jobs for the first time. And also with the Social Security number that they receive, they're able to, in some cases, apply for financial aid through the state or through universities to attend college. So it allows them to pursue higher education in many cases.
All right, so here we have a clip here I want to set up of Diana Gonzalez, and tell us who she is and what you talked to her about.
So she was brought to the U.S. from Mexico when she was 2 years old, so a classic person who's eligible for DACA. She got DACA this year. She's a student at San Diego City College, where I spoke to her at a protest. A lot of, more than 100 people were there protesting the Trump election.
All right, let's hear what she has to say.
It's sad because, the educational system taught us not to speak Spanish, and now they're going to want me to send me back to a country that I don't know anything about. I don't know who the president of Mexico is.
All right. Now, is that typical? Other folks you've talked to here? Is that you're hearing similar stories?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people fear that they're going to be losing their ability to pay for school or that they may be deported. In some cases, they don't speak Spanish because they've been here for so long. And even though Trump has said he's going to change priority towards deporting immigrants with criminal convictions. This is a recent statement that he's made. He's not necessarily going to be going after all immigrants. He has said that he plans to repeal Obama's executive actions, which include DACA. So that could mean if these young people don't face immediate deportation, they may still lose their funding for school and their work permits.
Now, I wanted to go back to something you mentioned, that interview Sunday on 60 Minutes and all. He talked about 2 or 3 million criminals, felons. But didn't Obama set a record here for deporting people? And it's mostly that class we're talking about. There really aren't 2 or 3 million, are there, despite what
I don't
Trump
know what
says?
the exact number is. I mean, just broadly, you're talking about the number gets thrown out a lot is 11.3 million.
No, that's overall. That's undocumented
overall.
folks in the country.
And so the questions you have and you make a good point about Obama. A lot of people don't realize that Obama deported a lot of people.
Record number.
True.
Right.
And so when Trump talks about maybe deporting 2 or 3, I don't know if he knows what the number is. And the point, to Gene's point, is when you're talking about criminals, is he going to do convictions or is he going to do arrests? I think there's a lot of wiggle room.
Or simply being in the country illegally, which would be an enormous
number.
number.
There's no certainty about how he's going to get to that number and how he defines criminal. And that is something for people to watch, because clearly there's a big difference in this country between convicted and arrested.
Right. Now, Roger, go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask Matt about the tax thing. You said the second item you mentioned the other day was tax reform, and that brings up the question of infrastructure. You also said we're going to build the world's greatest infrastructure in the U.S., and trillions of dollars people say is needed. Right. So how is that going to work?
Where does the money come from, and how does his co-party members in Congress feel about that? And
as you say, California, I don't know, 2 or 3 million more votes for Clinton than for him, right. And I wonder if we're going to be in the wilderness for 4 to 8 years.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up California, because the LA Times had a fascinating story today that said to wonder to try to figure out what's going to happen with California the next 4 years. Look at Texas. Under Obama, Texas really set itself up as like as someone who was at loggerheads with the administration, and you had an attorney general who filed about 30 lawsuits against the federal government. I mean, that's pretty astounding, right? And so there was this kind of power struggle taking place in real time, and now the shoe's on the other foot. So you're going to have California as a big potential power play against the federal government. And so the big question to watch in California now is who Jerry Brown wants to appoint for attorney general to replace Kamala Harris.
And when we're Pacifica and we join up with Oregon and Washington and secede from the Union,
not going to happen.
Cal exit, Pacifica, call it what you will. We'll take names here and give out a prize, like one of these mugs. Let's move back. There was someone else that you had interviewed here. Other minorities have expressed grave concerns, of course, and I want to set up this bite. Tell us about Mohammed, is it Mousse?
Oh, yes, Mousse.
Mousse, okay. Let's hear his bite and talk about his concerns.
People are going to think that they could do anything because it's Donald Trump, you know what I mean? And that's scary, you know, being African American, especially a male around the age of 19, you know.
All right, so what was his overall concern and other folks like him that you talked to?
So he feels he's already been seeing a lot of discrimination. He looks at the police shootings that we've been seeing across the country, and this has been under President Obama, who is an African American president. He feels that this is going to increase, and not, of course, not every single person of color feels the same way, but a lot of the people I've been interviewing at the protests or just looking at social media, a lot of people are expressing fear about what Trump's win means for them. They say they're facing increased racial harassment in schools, a lot of bullying, in the streets, on social media. And they believe that this is because Trump's comments about Mexicans, Muslims, the way that he talks about inner cities, they believe that this has fueled hatred against people of color. And so you're seeing a lot of protests here in San Diego. We stand against hate together.
So just wondering how the climate will change, and people across the country are in various cities. I did want to shift gears to another topic here, climate change. Huge consideration in California, of course, and in San Diego. We have very aggressive climate change. We've got a commander-in-chief now who is a climate change denier, and he's a bunch of allies among leaders in Congress. What do you see on that front?
Trump has called it a hoax repeatedly, climate change.
It's
said it was
Chinese
invented by the
invented
Chinese government.
Who famously this week said, no, we didn't.
He's walked back, and the Chinese government actually, pointed that out too. I mean, that's something to watch, and Governor Brown has already kind of stood up with his back straight and said, the policies in place in California being done for the right reasons and are going to continue to be done. So there may be some tension points there, but that's one of many big issues kind of to watch.
So the governor says California will continue to be a leader, but who knows what will happen. We got the Paris Accords here, the climate change accords. The Secretary of State was in Marrakesh this week talking about that. 200 nations have signed onto that, and the United States, number 2 polluter in the world, may not follow suit.
The Paris Agreement is something to watch. He does have the ability to renounce that on day one, but it's not quite so simple, but he can throw a monkey wrench in it. That's a pretty complex thing to unwind. I think it takes greater than 4 years, so we'll see what happens.
All right, very quickly, before we leave this topic, I did want to talk about, we mentioned Affordable Care Act and what might happen to Obamacare. Speaker of the House Paul Ryan this week talked about Medicare. We're going to go to a voucher system here. How does that play with the working class folks, many of whom have finished their careers and they're relying on Social Security and Medicare? Trump said quite definitely, one of the few definite things he said in the campaign, we're not going to touch Medicare, and now the leader of the House this week says, oh yeah, we're going to a voucher system.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to keep in mind is that this country is predominantly Republican right now, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all going to be moving in lockstep. There may be some tension between Speaker of the House, the Senate, and Trump, and as you point out, Trump said we're not going to touch entitlements. So.
And Trump went after the Republican establishment as much as he did liberals in this campaign. Yeah, all right. Lots to talk about as we move forward, a lot of stories to go. Well, another Trump-related story, the president-elect faces lawsuits here and in New York accusing him of fraud, another first for a president-elect. And it looks like we may have a settlement today. That's just days before the trial was to commence against Trump and his defunct university, here before District Judge Gonzalo Curiel, who Trump famously called biased during the campaign. Bianca, what do we know now? A lot of reports across the nation today, this morning, that there is a settlement and there's a hearing this afternoon after we air here on the radio but not on TV tonight. What do we know at this point?
I'm going to run out pretty quick after this. So it came out of New York that there's probably a settlement reached that will likely be discussed this afternoon at the hearing in San Diego's federal court. The settlement's reported to be between about 20 to 25 million. It would be what's called a global settlement. So it would apply to all 3 cases against Trump University, 2 of which are in San Diego.
Okay, and one, as we said, was out of New York, brought by the Attorney General of that state, right?
Yes.
All right, now remind us here, what are the plaintiffs alleging here? These were folks who went to Trump University, tried to get some expertise in real estate and marketing in that realm, and what are they claiming happened?
So all the cases rely on essentially the same fraud claims. The case in San Diego that was set to go to trial the Monday after Thanksgiving, that was filed by Sonny Lowe, who's actually a senior citizen. So there's a financial elder abuse claim in that case as well. Judge Curiel has insisted that the case get either settled or go to trial after Thanksgiving.
Because it's been a while, has it not?
It's been almost 7 years.
Okay. All right, and the old saying is, justice delayed is justice denied. So they're claiming that there was just fraud, that they said they were going to have this expertise. Mr. Trump himself was going to bring his long development and real estate expertise to bear, pick experts to teach these courses, and what do they claim happened? Yeah,
so the 2 major claims of this case that were decided upon and what's called certified in court is that Trump handpicked or hand-selected the instructors himself, and that the title university was basically a way to deceive students into believing that it was accredited or sort of on par with major business schools. It turned out that Trump really had little involvement in the school at all. He didn't hand-select the instructors, and his attorneys say that they relied on sales puffery common in advertising to sort of capitalize on his name to get people to purchase the program.
All right, so they're saying that amounts to fraud then, that they were basically sold a bill of goods. Now, what does Trump and his attorneys have to say about that? So,
as you mentioned earlier, he kind of has been adamant on the campaign trail this year, including when he came to San Diego, that the claims were basically bogus, that if the students were unsuccessful with what they learned from Trump University, that it was because of their own sort of failings.
Their own failings, yeah.
That it wasn't the school's fault. So he's really stuck by that. It's surprising to hear that there could be a settlement today.
Yeah, because he was pretty adamant, was he not, that he was going to, let's see this through to trial, the truth will come out at trial, right?
He was, and he also said himself that he would come and testify in person, which has also kind of been up in the air the past 2 weeks as things have gotten worked out.
Jean?
Are there people who are happy with the education that they received?
So that's an interesting part of the case. It was actually in the document fight last week. There was a hearing in federal court over motions to exclude evidence. So Trump's attorneys actually wanted these student satisfaction surveys to come in. He said there was a 98% satisfaction level. Obviously, that may or may not be untrue, but they wanted that to come in, and there was kind of a fight with him and the judge's attorneys over it, and he actually ultimately ruled he would let those surveys come in if it does go to trial.
And he also wanted to exclude a lot of statements and media reports that were made during the campaign, he being Trump, that is, right, his attorneys. And what did the judge say about that?
So he's also allowing those to go in if it goes to trial. It seems that it probably won't, that there's going to be a settlement announced this afternoon. But if it does go to trial, the plaintiff's attorneys can bring in all this information over tweets, what he said in debates, what he said on the campaign trail at rallies, including in San Diego. He talked about the judge famously, said he would be biased because he's of Mexican descent. A lot of Republicans.
Of course he's not, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of Republican leaders came out.
He was born in Indiana, I should say.
Yeah, they came out against it. So all of that is fair game if it goes to trial.
All right, let's talk briefly about the other suit, which is a newer suit, the Cohen suit.
So the Cohen suit, it's not near trial. It was filed in 2013, essentially the same fraud claims as the Lowe case, but there is a civil racketeering claim which has a lot higher stakes. The Racketeering Act was created to basically prosecute the mafia and organized crime. So it's a high stakes game to bring
use
that.
the RICO statute.
Yeah, to use that, and it would have triple damages and attorney's fees if he was found to have abused that.
So a little different animal. Now, again, as you said at the outset, we don't have details yet. What's it likely in these lawsuits? Are we going to get a lot of details? Are we going to get Mr. Trump and his attorneys admitting some sort of culpability or guilt in this regard?
No, so that would be one of the conditions of the
That's
settlement.
how they get the settlements in these suits.
So he wouldn't admit to any wrongdoing, no fraud. And I imagine a lot of the terms will be private. They won't be released publicly. There will be a gag order on the suit.
Okay, and there was 10 hours of testimony, a taped deposition of Donald Trump, so that probably won't see the light of day now if the suit doesn't go forward.
No, and that was a major fight over the summer. A bunch of media outlets got involved in the case, actually led by the Washington Post, the New York Times. They wanted to get access.
Yeah, because lawsuits tend to be open in open court, and when the evidence comes out, as it normally does.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Well, we'll see what happens here and what this settlement may bring and move on. Well, a bold plan that spawned a lot of press and a big fight before it was scuttled has quietly been revived. The idea was to get vehicles out of the center of the city jewel known as Balboa Park. And 6 years and plenty of fighting later, it looks like it's going to happen. Roger, start with what the San Diego City Council, what did they do here? And again, we heard a lot about it way back when, and all of a sudden here it is back.
Well, just briefly remind people what it is. Erwin Jacobs from Qualcomm proposed this idea of removing cars and parking from the Plaza de Panama and other areas right in the central Mesa. He was going to pay for most of it, or his committee was going to pay for most of it. At the time, it was estimated at about $45 million. Well, so Saber Heritage Organization, the Preservation Group, sued the city and the Jacobs Committee. They won, but then it was overturned on appeal. So then now it's come back.
That hung the whole thing up.
So then at that time, Dr. Jacobs walked away from it and said, "I don't want to be involved. I have other things to do."
I'll take money, my money can go elsewhere.
Then we had, 2 mayors later, came back to life. Mayor Faulkner talked him into stepping up again. So now the project is back. The city council voted in favor of bonds on Monday to pay for a parking garage. The downside is it's now priced at $79 million, and the city's going to cover most of the costs rather than the Jacobs Committee.
Oh, really? Okay, so we went from $45 million to 79 million in debt. What happened to inflation's like 1%? How did we get there?
I did ask the guy who worked on the numbers. He said, well, the estimate was not based on anything at the time. It was all just guesswork. So as they did more and more fine-tuning, it got to be more expensive.
So then they've looked. So a little more detail. So we're going to have this brand. Folks who are familiar with Balboa Park, the Laurel Street Bridge comes in over 163 down below. That'd be a beautiful area. And this is going to be a spur off that bridge, right, to go to his big area, which is now a parking lot at street level behind the organ pavilion.
Right. So to get the cars out of the middle, you have to put them somewhere. So they're proposing to build this 400-foot bypass called Centennial Bridge at the end of the Cabrillo Bridge. You go through the Alcazar Garden parking lot and over to the Spreckles Organ Pavilion lot, which will be where the new garage will be. And then
underground garage. Yeah.
Well, it's not really underground. It's a three-level.
It's multi-level. Okay.
Yeah. And then that will free up all the spaces that are now taken over by cars, and they'll become plazas and walkways, pedestrians. There'll be nice landscaping. There'll be a 2.2-acre park on top of the garage. So it'll
really transform the core of the park.
It actually will be quite beautiful. The objections were from Soho and other people that they didn't like changing the historic look of the west side of the entrance to the park. They didn't like paid parking. It's going to cost up to $12 on weekends for all-day parking in this parking garage. And they said, we can do all this without spending all this money, and had various solutions. But the city council said, we haven't been convinced, we'll go for it.
I was surprised there wasn't more opposition about the paid parking. I mean, that's a big change.
Yeah, you really only had one council member, right, who was objecting on that.
Well, I guess the reason why was because still most of the 80% of the spaces in the park will be free. I think the question mark on this whole project, among other things, is will people use this parking garage? Will they pay up to $12 a day to park in the park when you have all this free parking nearby? And they're worried, the critics are worried that if it doesn't pay its way and the city council has to dip into general fund to pay the difference, then they'll make other parts of the park for paid parking. And I guess you could say in the big greater scheme of things, parking should not, there's a price for pre-parking, and the price is all this asphalt, traffic, poor parking management, and in a big city, parking is not free anymore. Right. Beaches, parks, downtown, theme parks, everywhere, it's paid for parking, and that's the nature of society. So
yeah, I'd be surprised if you don't see more places start, wanting to charge or charging for parking.
Yeah, and then I wanted to mention that another issue in the park came up during the election, which was Measure I, which was a proposal to make the San Diego High School 34-acre site a permanent school site, because
tell us where that is.
Well, it's on Park Boulevard on the other side of Interstate 5.
So it's just south of
but it's in the park itself. It's never been legal there. It was put on there sort of as a
some kind of add-on. Huh?
Yeah, well, it was put on when nothing else was in the park in the 1880s. So the voters approved the idea that the city could have a long-term lease with the school district, and the question now is, will the school district pay something for this lease? They don't want to pay anything, and the critics say, you should pay $1 million or more a year for this very valuable land. So that's going to come up in next year, I think.
All right. Now, getting back to the core of the park there, kind of give us some bullets on the numbers there. Again, how much is it going to cost? What area are we talking about? How many car spaces in that?
Let's see. There's 797 parking spaces, 3 levels on this garage. There are handicap spaces and valet spaces in the Alcazar Garden parking lot. They're in the Plaza de Panama outside the Museum of Art will be these 2 very shallow pools, and very nice with new landscaping and furniture, outdoor furniture. And probably the most interesting thing people haven't focused on, which I think is rather intriguing or attractive, is that outside the Museum of Man on the west side, you just drive through. There's nothing there now, but that's going to be turned into a very nice outdoor patio where they could have all kinds of events and food and evening dinner and things. So that, along with all the other places in the middle of the park, will be kind of like Central Park in New York City, where the cars are hidden away. You have all these open spaces for the public.
A lot of green space. Short time left here. Doesn't do anything, all this money going to this one project doesn't do anything about the structure we talked about, the things falling down, the buildings in disrepair.
No, the estimates of deferred maintenance is up to $300 million or more, not to mention a whole series of other big projects that the parks have been on the to-do list since 1989. So you could say, well, we should spend this money on those other things. Well, I think the problem here is that as a result of Dr. Jacobs' fight with the preservationists, all the big donors went away from the park, said, we don't have anything to do with it, it's not going to happen.
So maybe we're going to have to figure out how to bring them back and get some money.
So if this happens, then the doors will be open, the riches will flow into the park.
Oh, we'll see if that all happens. We'll have to leave it there for now. Well, before we close today, I wanted to note the passing of a pioneering journalist and widely admired American. Gwen Eiffel's grace, intelligence, curiosity, and talent earned her the respect and admiration of journalists and citizens across America. Her 4 decades of interviews and reporting enriched our lives and informed our democracy. I'm proud our Roundtable show, patterned after her Washington Week in Review, followed her on KPBS TV on Friday nights. We will all miss her wisdom and great sense of fairness, especially in these turbulent times. Gwen Eiffel was just 61 when she died of cancer this week. Well, that does wrap up another week of Stories at the Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Matt Hall of the San Diego Union-Tribune, Jean Guerrero of KPBS News, Bianca Bruno of Courthouse News, and Roger Sholey, also of the Union-Tribune. And a reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.